Picture a pharmacy, not the kind you walk into now with its fluorescent lights and plastic packaging and a teenage cashier who can barely explain what ibuprofen does. I mean a real pharmacy, a 19th century Berlin apothecary. Dark wood shelves floor to ceiling, hundreds of glass bottles with hand-lettered Latin labels, each one catching the lamplight like a row of small amber promises. Beautiful, right? Now let me tell you what's actually inside those bottles. Mercury, arsenic, strychnine, lead acetate, belladonna. Opium dissolved in alcohol at concentrations that would make a modern pharmacist quit on the spot. Preparations made from the dried organs of animals you'd prefer not to think about. Powders ground from minerals that your body will spend the rest of your short life trying desperately to expel. That beautiful amber bottle on the middle shelf, the one labelled liquor fowlery in elegant copper plate, that's arsenic solution. Your doctor will prescribe it for your skin. Your wife will take it to improve her complexion. And yes, it does improve your complexion for a while, right up until it slowly destroys your kidneys and peripheral nervous system. The one next to it, unguentum hydragiri, that greyish paste that smells faintly of metal? That's mercury ointment, applied directly to the skin, sometimes rubbed into the gums, given to children, for months at a time. And the people taking these things weren't stupid. They weren't being tricked by obvious fraudsters in travelling wagons, not all of them anyway. They were following the advice of trained physicians, of respected apothecaries, of the most educated people in the most scientifically advanced city in the world. Berlin in 1866 had the finest medical university in Europe. It had Rudolf Virchow, the father of modern pathology, quite literally revolutionizing how human beings understand disease. It had the Charité Hospital, already 150 years old and packed with brilliant, dedicated doctors, and those doctors were prescribing arsenic and mercury, and preparations that we would now classify as poisons, full stop, no discussion. So how does that happen? How does a city full of intelligent, well-meaning, genuinely caring physicians end up doing that? How does a mother look at a bottle containing strychnine and think, yes, this will make my child stronger? That's what tonight's about. Not just the remedies, not just the poisons, but the world that made people trust them. The desperation underneath. The logic that in a city where a quarter of the children died before age 5 made a dangerous cure feel better than no cure at all. We're going back to Berlin, 1866, one of the most turbulent years in Prussian history. The cholera has just swept through the city for what everyone hopes is the last time. Bismarck is playing chess with the rest of Europe and winning. The city is exploding with new people, new buildings, new industries, new money, and new diseases, always new diseases. You're going to live this one, not as a tourist, not reading about it in a history book. As a person who works every day inside one of those beautiful, deadly apothecary shops, who measures out those amber poisons with careful hands, who watches what they do to people. Get comfortable. Here we go. Your name is Wilhelm Becker. You're 19 years old. You're not from Berlin. You're from Luckenwalde, a town 40 kilometers south that you've been trying to forget since the day you left it. A place of 3,000 people. One church that needed repair. 2 taverns that didn't. And a future so clearly mapped out ahead of you that you could have drawn it in your sleep. Apprentice to your uncle's grain business. Journeyman to somewhere slightly less depressing. Slow accumulation of savings. Marriage to some girl whose name you haven't decided yet. Children. Old age. Death. All of it practically scheduled, like a coach timetable that nobody had thought to question. You questioned it. 3 years ago, when Herr Apotheker Schönberg came to Luckenwald to visit his sister, and your mother introduced you over Sunday dinner, and Schönberg looked at you with sharp grey eyes and asked what you wanted to do with your life, and you said the first true thing you'd said in months. I want to understand how things work. Not just things, people, bodies, why they break, how to fix them. Schönberg had studied chemistry in Leipzig, medicine briefly in Prague, and spent the last 20 years running his apothecary on Linienstrasse in Berlin's Mitte district. He was 61 years old, childless, and his current apprentice had just left to join the Prussian army and die of typhus in Bohemia within the year, though nobody knew that yet. He looked at you over his Sunday roast and said, "Come to Berlin in September." That was 3 years ago. You know the shop now the way you know your own hands. The shop opens at 6 in the morning, not 6 o'clock in the comfortable sense where you've had a hot breakfast and a moment to yourself. 6 o'clock in the pull yourself from the narrow bed in the back room, feel the cold of the wooden floor against your bare feet, and be standing behind the counter before the Church of St. Peter strikes the third stroke. Schönberg's apothecary occupies the ground floor of a 4-story building on Linienstrasse, 2 blocks from the Rosenthaler Platz. The building smells of old stone and coal smoke from the floors above, where 3 families live in what passes for apartments in this part of Berlin. You know them by their sounds. The Günthers on the 2nd floor, who fight every Thursday without apparent reason. The widow Kraus on the 3rd, who moves furniture at 1 in the morning and has for the entire 3 years you've been here. And someone on the 4th floor who you've never met but whose cough you would recognize anywhere. A wet, tearing sound that comes through the ceiling on cold nights and does not improve. The apothecary itself is maybe 9 meters long and 4 meters wide. It feels smaller because every wall is covered in shelves and every shelf is full. Wood drawers, each one pulled by a brass ring, each one labelled in Schönberg's careful Latin hand. Hundreds of them, floor to ceiling on the back wall. You know what's in most of them without looking. Rheum, rhubarb root for digestion, chamomilla, chamomile for the spasms, belladonna folia, dried belladonna leaves, atropine locked inside them waiting, digitalis, foxglove, which will strengthen a failing heart or stop a healthy one depending entirely on the dose, and frankly sometimes even with the right dose. Along the left wall the bottles, glass in every size from thumbnail small to 1/2 meter tall, stoppered with ground glass or corks or wax seals. Some are clear, and you can see the liquid inside. Greenish tinctures, colourless spirits, something deep brown that smells of tar. Some are amber glass because the contents are destroyed by light. Some are kept in a locked cabinet because Schönberg doesn't trust everyone who comes into the shop, including, on some days, you. The smell is the first thing you remember from your first morning here. Standing at the door at 5 in the morning, bag in hand, 16 years old, having never been to a city larger than Potsdam, and the smell hit you before the door was fully open. It is not one smell. It is 20 smells inhabiting the same space with varying degrees of courtesy toward each other. Camphor, sharp and medicinal, cutting through everything else like a knife. It's in the liniment preparations and the inhalation treatments and the moth-repellent sachets that Schönberg sells to the ladies of better neighbourhoods for their wardrobes. Underneath that, alcohol. Not the comfortable grain spirit smell of a tavern, but something cleaner and more chemical. The ethyl alcohol that carries most of the tinctures, It evaporates from every bottle that isn't perfectly sealed, which is most of them. Then sulphur. The burned match smell of sulphur compounds in the various mineral preparations. There's a jar of sulphur flowers on the third shelf that you've been meaning to reseal for a month. And underneath everything else, something harder to name. Sweet and slightly rotten and organic and deeply wrong. The way certain dried plant extracts smell when you really pay attention. You stopped paying full attention after about a week. It becomes part of the background. Like the cough from the fourth floor. The counter is dark wood, worn smooth from 30 years of Schönberg's hands and the hands of his previous apprentices. It runs the full width of the shop, separating the shelves and equipment from the door and the 2 wooden stools where customers can sit while waiting. On your side of the counter, the balance scale, brass pans worn bright from daily use, kept scrupulously level on a wooden block. The mortar and pestle, large white, porcelain, in which you have spent significant portions of the last 3 years grinding things. Your hands know the weight of the pestle the way a carpenter knows his hammer. The measuring glasses, each one a slightly different shade of stained from whatever went through them last. On the wall above the counter a framed Latin text. Primo non nocere. First, do no harm. You've looked at that text so many times it stopped meaning anything, which might be the first problem. It's the 14th of June, 1866, a Tuesday. You know the date because Schönberg writes it in the ledger every morning, and because Prussia declared war on Austria 3 days ago, and Berlin knows it the way a body knows a fever. Not in one place, but everywhere at once. The newspapers are full of it. Men stand on corners reading the Vossische Zeitung aloud to whoever will listen. The Landwehr regiments are assembling east of the city. Soldiers in dark blue uniforms with leather shakos move through streets that were previously occupied by merchants and factory workers and mothers with children. But the apothecary opens at 6 regardless of whether the country is at peace or war, and the people of Linienstrasse and the surrounding blocks still need their medicines, and their children still have fevers, and their backs still ache from the factories, and their lungs still fill with whatever the tenement buildings are doing to them this particular season. You've been awake since 5, not because you had to be, because the cough from the 4th floor was bad last night and you heard it through your sleep, and by the time it stopped, you were too awake to go back under. Your room is the back room, technically, a space between the main shop and the small laboratory where Schönberg does his compounding. 4 meters by 3, your bed along the left wall, a table with a wash basin, a shelf for your books, a window the size of a large book itself, looking out onto the alley behind the building. The water in the wash basin this morning is very cold and has a faint brown tinge that you have learned not to question. You got it yesterday from the pump on Rosenthaler Platz, 2 blocks away, carrying it back in a ceramic jug that weighs almost nothing empty and everything full. Berlin does not have running water on Linienstrasse, not for people at your level. Not in buildings like this one. You wash your face and hands with particular care. Schönberg's only firm rule about personal hygiene is clean hands behind the counter, and he checks without appearing to check. In that way, he has of seeing everything without looking at anything. You dress. White shirt, slightly grey from repeated washing in water. That is never quite clean enough to make things truly white. Dark trousers. The apron you'll wear all day in the shop, which has its own layered history of stains despite being washed once a week. Green residue at the left cuff from a copper sulfate compound last month. A yellowish shadow. Near the pocket that might be turmeric or might be something you'd rather not know about. Your hair, brushed flat with the water from the basin. In 3 years in Berlin, you have learned that appearance matters here in a way it never did in Luckenwalde. Schönberg wears the same black coat every day, spotlessly maintained, and his manner is such that customers treat him as they might treat a physician. Which is the point. The apothecary must be trusted, and trust is visual before it is anything else. You check yourself in the small mirror above the wash basin, a face that hasn't finished deciding what it's going to look like. Brown eyes that your mother said were clever, and Schönberg says are too quick to show what you're thinking. Good teeth, which is not to be taken for granted in 1866 Berlin. The beginnings of a beard that you've been attempting and failing to grow for 8 months. You look like what you are. A young man from a small town trying very hard to become something in a large city. The laboratory is between your room and the main shop. This is where you spend most of your actual working time, and it is nothing like the beautiful amber bottle elegance of the front counter. It's a workspace. A scarred wooden bench running the full length of the room covered in equipment. Bunsen burner, glass tubing, flasks of various shapes and sizes, ceramic bowls, wire mesh screens for filtering. The smell in here is sharper than the front room, less artful, more honest. Schönberg is already in the laboratory when you come through at 5:45. He is often already in the laboratory. You have never definitively established when he sleeps. He's a small man, barely to your shoulder, with the slightly stooped posture of someone who has spent 40 years leaning over things. His beard is white and precisely trimmed. His hands are extraordinary. 70 years of life have made them a topographic record of chemical exposure. A scar on the right index finger from a reaction he refuses to discuss. Permanent faint discoloration on the left palm from years of mercury contact, which is something you try not to think about too directly. He is grinding something in a small mortar when you enter. The sound is specific to the material. This one has a slight roughness to it, a resistance that means he's working with something resinous. He does not look up. The boy from Sophienstrasse will be in this morning, he says. His mother wants the continuation of the treatment. You know the boy from Sophienstrasse. 8 years old, thin, always looks exhausted. He's been coming in for 2 months. His mother believes, and Schönberg has not corrected her, that her son's pallor and lethargy are the result of some internal weakness that requires strengthening. The treatment is a tonic. Schönberg prepares it himself, in small brown bottles, 6 at a time. You have watched him prepare it. You know what's in it. Iron sulfate, which is reasonable enough. Gentian, root, which is bitter and stimulates digestion. A small quantity of cinchona bark extract for the quinine, and strychnine, a measured quantity of strychnine extracted from Strychnos nux vomica, calculated by Schönberg with the precision that comes from 30 years of practice to a dose that will stimulate rather than kill. The logic is not insane. Strychnine in small doses does stimulate the nervous system. It does temporarily increase muscle tone. It makes people feel more energetic. The boy probably feels better after his weekly dose for a few hours. His mother sees the flush in his cheeks and believes the tonic is working. What she doesn't see, because it's happening at the cellular level in ways that nobody in 1866 fully understands yet, is what the cumulative exposure is doing to his developing nervous system. You know this because you have been reading. You read constantly, which Schönberg encourages within limits. You've been through his professional library, the chemistry texts from Leipzig. the pharmacological reference books from Paris, the bound volumes of the Archive für pathologische Anatomie that Rudolf Virchow has been publishing since 1847. Virchow is brilliant. He is changing everything about how medicine understands disease. His cellular theory, that illness originates in the cell rather than in vague systemic imbalances or miasmas or disturbed humours, is the future. You understand this the way you sometimes understand things you can't quite prove yet. Intuitively, completely, before you have the words for it. What you can't always articulate, and what keeps you awake some nights more effectively than the cough from the fourth floor, is the gap between what the best science in Berlin knows or is beginning to know, and what you do every day behind that counter. The strychnine tonic for the boy from Sophienstrasse, the arsenic preparation for the woman on Auguststrasse who comes in every 2 weeks for her complexion, the mercury ointment that 3 different customers apply to their skin for 3 different conditions, only one of which it has any real efficacy against. You sometimes think, standing at a very particular moment in history, close enough to the scientific revolution in medicine to see it coming, but still deep enough in the old world to be participating daily in practices that the next 50 years will condemn. It's a strange place to stand. You've never found quite the right words to describe it to Schönberg. You're not sure you should try. Yes, sir, you say, the boy from Sophienstrasse. The shop opens and Berlin comes in. Not all at once, not dramatically. In small increments. First, a woman from the building across the street who comes every Tuesday morning for her husband's chest plaster. She's 40 years old, with the hands of someone 20 years older, and the careful posture of someone who has spent years trying to take up less space in the world. She doesn't speak much. She hands you the written instruction Schönberg prepared last week. You retrieve the plaster from the 3rd shelf. You wrap it in paper. She pays with coins counted out of a small purse with deliberate care. She leaves. Then an older man whose name you don't know but whose complaint you do. Rheumatism in both knees, winter and summer. He gets the standard compound preparation, camphor, turpentine, and something else that Schönberg adds, in quantities he has never written down and told you only once, which means you had to memorize it perfectly or ask again, which you would not do. The man smells of coal and machine oil. His hands are swollen at the knuckles in the specific way of someone who has worked with metal for 30 years. He pays, he leaves, he walks with the stiffness that the compound will slightly reduce for approximately 3 days. The morning builds. By 8 o'clock there are sometimes 3 or 4 people waiting. Schönberg takes the complex cases himself. The ones involving diagnosis, the ones where the prescription requires judgment. You handle the straightforward retrievals, the reorders, the over-the-counter preparations that don't require consultation. And while you do this, while your hands are moving on automatic through the familiar motions of wrapping and measuring and counting, your mind is cataloguing. Because that's what it does. It has been doing this for 3 years, and it does not stop. The woman with the chest plaster. Her husband probably has bronchitis, possibly worse. The plaster will provide some warmth, and the vapours may open the airways slightly. It will not cure anything. The man with the rheumatism. The camphor compound reduces inflammation marginally, and the turpentine creates a warming sensation that the brain interprets as pain relief, even when the pain itself is unchanged. He will feel better. He will attribute his feeling better to the compound. He will return. This is not deception exactly. It is medicine operating at the edge of what it knows how to do. At 9 o'clock, a woman comes in who changes the quality of the morning. She is maybe 35. Dark circles under her eyes that suggest either weeks of inadequate sleep or weeks of inadequate food or both. She's carrying a child, maybe 2 years old, whose face is not the right colour. Babies are pink when they're healthy. Pink or red, or some variation on the warm end of the spectrum. This child is a colour that sits on the wrong side of pale, a greyish white that makes you look twice and then a third time because your mind doesn't want to accept what your eyes are reporting. "My son," the woman says, and her voice does the thing voices do when someone has been holding themselves together by will alone for so long that speaking has become a structural decision. 3 days now, he hasn't kept anything down. He's not sleeping. He's barely crying. He was crying more before, and now he's quiet, and I don't... She stops, looks at the counter rather than at you. The child in her arms makes a small sound, not quite a cry, more like a reminder that it exists. "Has he seen a physician?" you ask. "We saw Dr. Hartman on Sunday." A pause. "He gave us this." She reaches into the pocket of her coat with the hand not supporting the child and produces a small paper packet. You take it and open it, and you know before you've finished unfolding the paper what it's going to be, because this is what Dr. Hartman gives. It is what Dr. Hartman has been giving for 20 years, and Schoenberg has told you about Dr. Hartman in the careful, neutral tone he uses when he is being professional, and would not be professional if he allowed himself to be anything else. Calomel, mercury chloride, white powder, used for decades as a purgative, a cathartic, the go-to treatment for a dozen different conditions from intestinal disorders to teething pain in infants. Given to a child this small in these quantities for 3 days. Your hands hold the paper packet and you are very still for a moment. The child is quiet because calomel at this dosage, in a body this small, has been working through the system for 3 days and has reached a point of equilibrium that is not healthy equilibrium. The mercury is being absorbed. It is being distributed through the tissues. It is doing what mercury does. And Dr. Hartman said to continue, you ask? He said to continue until the purging was complete, that the sickness was a blockage of the intestines and the calomel would clear it. You look at the child. The child is not looking at anything in particular. Its eyes are slightly unfocused. "I'll get Herr Schoenberg," you say. Here is what you know about calomel in children in 1866. You know that it works, in the sense that it reliably causes purging. You know that physicians have used it for a very long time. You know that Schoenberg has some reservations about it that he's expressed to you in private, but that he would not express to a patient because Dr. Hartman is a licensed physician, and Schoenberg is an apothecary, and these are different things in the professional hierarchy of Prussian medicine. Here is what you are beginning to understand from the reading, from Virchow's pathological observations, from a paper by an English physician named Jonathan Hutchinson that you found in one of the foreign medical journals Schoenberg keeps on the top shelf. Mercury accumulates. It does not pass through cleanly the way a purgative should. It deposits in tissues. It damages the kidney tubules. It affects the nervous system. In adults, the effects can be distributed across years. In children, the same dosage operates on a smaller body over a shorter timeline. There is a term for the specific pattern of damage that mercury causes in children who've been given calomel. Pink disease, it will eventually be called, though the name won't be established for decades and the mercury connection won't be definitively proven until the 1950s. You don't have this context, you don't have the vocabulary, but you have Virchow's framework. Look at what's actually happening in the cells. Look at the tissue. Don't theorize about imbalanced humours and blocked intestinal pathways. Look at what the substance is doing at the level that actually matters. And you can see, in the colour of this child's face and the quiet that has replaced crying, and the slightly wrong quality of his eyes, that the calomel is not clearing a blockage. The calomel is the problem. Schoenberg comes through from the laboratory. He looks at the woman, at the child, at the paper packet you're still holding. His face does what it does, which is to reveal nothing and absorb everything simultaneously. He asks questions, the exact sequence of symptoms. When the illness started, what the child has taken, what he's produced, what his temperature was when last checked, how he's sleeping, the woman answers. Her voice is steady now because she's talking to Schoenberg, who has the manner of someone for whom all answers are acceptable, and no situation is outside the range of his experience. Schoenberg examines the child with practiced hands, lifts the small eyelids, looks at the conjunctiva, presses gently on the abdomen while watching the child's face for reaction. Then he is quiet for a moment. "Stop the calomel," he says. The woman looks confused. But Dr. Hartmann said, "I know what Dr. Hartmann said. Stop the calomel. Your son needs fluids, cool water in small amounts, and rest. Nothing else for now." A pause in which you can see the woman processing the conflict. A licensed physician told her one thing, the apothecary is telling her another. Is my son going to be all right? Schoenberg looks at her with the grey eyes that give nothing away and everything at once. "Come back tomorrow morning," he says. "Early. Bring him, and stop the calomel." The woman leaves. You watch her go. The child is still quiet against her shoulder. When she's gone, the shop is silent for a moment except for the ambient street noise through the closed door. Someone outside is selling something from a cart, calling their wares in a voice designed to carry over a city. "The calomel, you say?" "Yes," Schoenberg says. "You know it's—" "I know what it is." He turns away, goes back toward the laboratory, stops in the doorway. "Write it in the daily register. The time, what I observed, what I advised." You write it. Every word. This is the thing about medicine in 1866 Berlin. The thing that is almost impossible to explain to someone standing in the future looking back. It is not that the physicians are stupid. It is not that they don't care. Many of them are brilliant. Many of them would dedicate their lives to their patients and call it a reasonable trade. The problem is that they are working with a set of tools and theories that are partly right and partly catastrophically wrong, and they cannot yet tell the difference. For 2,000 years, Western medicine has operated on variations of the humoral theory, that the body's health is a matter of balance between four fundamental substances: blood and phlegm and yellow bile and black bile. Illness is imbalance. Treatment is restoration of balance. Purging is logical. Bloodletting is logical. Anything that visibly affects the body, that causes sweating or purging or increased heartbeat or decreased fever, is potentially therapeutic because it is, at least, doing something. Mercury purges. This is genuinely true. It is one of the most effective purgatives ever discovered, which is why physicians have been using it for 400 years. The problem is that the purging it causes is a secondary effect, an attempt by the body to expel a substance that is actively poisoning it, and the dose required for effective purging is very close to the dose that causes irreversible tissue damage. Arsenic tonics work in the sense that small doses do temporarily improve complexion and increase energy. This is because arsenic in low doses stimulates the production of red blood cells and increases peripheral circulation, giving people a genuine flush of apparent health. The problem is that arsenic accumulates in bone and soft tissue, and that the health benefits of the tonic phase are paid for, sometimes years later, with neurological damage and increased cancer risk. Strychnine stimulates, belladonna dilates, laudanum relieves. These effects are real. They are not imagined or fraudulent. What is not yet fully understood, what Virchow and his students are only beginning to articulate in the research journals that Schoenberg keeps on the top shelf, is the cellular cost of these effects, the mechanism of action, what the substance is actually doing to the tissues that produce the observed result. The gap between it works and it is safe has not yet been filled with the science that would fill it. That science is being built in Berlin right now in the laboratories of the Friedrich Wilhelms Universität, in the wards of the Charité, by people whose names will be in every medical textbook written in the next century. But it has not arrived yet, and so the child from the woman on the grey morning of June 14th, 1866, gets calomel from a physician who has used it for 20 years and genuinely believes in it, and the only person in the transaction who has doubts is an apothecary's apprentice who reads too much and keeps his mouth closed when the professional hierarchy requires it. At 10 o'clock, Schoenberg tells you to take the morning delivery. This is a regular task, twice a week, deliveries to a list of customers who cannot easily come to the shop. Mostly the elderly, a few invalids, 2 women who are recovering from recent childbirths and cannot yet travel. You pack the preparations into a wooden box, a slatted thing that used to contain wine and has been repurposed and smells faintly of cork and old alcohol underneath the medicinal smell that is now its primary identity. You put on your hat, take the box, step through the door. Berlin hits you. After 3 years, it doesn't knock you back the way it did at 16, when you stood on the platform of the Anhalter Bahnhof, and the city's noise arrived like a physical force, and you stood holding your bag and thought about turning around. Now it's more of a greeting. Loud, not entirely friendly, specific to time and weather. This morning, Linienstrasse is already thick with movement. The coal delivery wagon is blocking the left side of the street, 2 draft horses standing patiently, while the delivery man and the building's concierge argue about something in the aggressive shorthand of men who have the same argument twice a week. A woman leans from a 3rd-floor window to beat a rug, methodically, sending small clouds of dust down onto the street below, where several people walk through them without acknowledgement. The street itself, cobblestones worn smooth, in the centre from decades of wheels and hooves, rough and uneven at the edges. Between the stones, a complex ecosystem of things you prefer not to catalogue in detail, wet from last night's rain, which has not improved the general aromatic situation. The smell of a Berlin street in 1866 is a curriculum. Horse manure primarily. There are approximately 50,000 horses in Berlin right now, working the streets and the livery stables and the coal yards and the brewery wagons, and they produce what horses produce on the schedule horses keep, which is continuous. The city has street sweepers. They are losing the battle impressively. Coal smoke. Everywhere. All the time. The factories to the north and east of the city are running round the clock, and the domestic heating fires in every building, and the forges and the bakeries and the laundries. The smoke settles into the streets in a way that makes the air on windless mornings feel like something you could pick up with a spoon. Underneath those 2 dominant notes, food from the stalls and vendors, bread and fried things and the meaty smell of sausages from a Wurstkessel at the corner, where a woman with red hands is serving into small paper cones for 2 pfennig. And underneath the food, something older, organic, the smell of a city where the sanitation infrastructure has not kept pace with the population growth, where 2,000 people might share a single courtyard pump, where the cellar floors of the tenement buildings sometimes flood with what collects below ground. You know this smell well. You've been breathing it for 3 years. Your body has decided it's normal, which is the human body's great adaptability and, in this particular case, its great vulnerability. You head north along Linienstrasse. The first delivery is to Frau Henning on Weinmeisterstrasse. Her monthly supply of digitalis tincture, which Schönberg has prepared with the care he brings to preparations that have a narrow margin between therapeutic and lethal. The digitalis slows the heart and strengthens its contractions. Frau Henning has a condition that her physician and Schönberg agree benefits from this effect. The dose has been calibrated over 3 years of observation. This one is real medicine. This one works. Frau Henning is 72, small, sharp-eyed, entirely unimpressed by everything. She lives on the 3rd floor of a building that has probably not had its interior repaired since the 1820s, and she has opinions about this that she expresses to you every time you deliver. She takes the bottle from you without thanks, which is how she's taken it for 3 years, asks if Schönberg is well with the tone of someone who doesn't particularly care but knows the form, and closes the door. The building smells of old wood and cabbage and something underneath that you've identified as the smell of crowded human habitation. Over a long period of time, every floor is the same smell, just a slightly different concentration. Down 5 flights of stairs that are perfectly sound except for the 3rd step on the 2nd floor, which you learned on your first delivery here and have remembered precisely ever since. Knowledge like this is what Berlin teaches you. Which stair creaks? Which water pump is 2 streets closer? Which street vendor sells bread that's genuinely fresh? And which one sells yesterday's loaves with a fresh score across the top to look right? The city is navigable, but it requires constant updating. It changes. A building is demolished and the shortcut you used is gone. A vendor moves. A street gets repaved and the cobbles are new and rough, and your usual walking pace throws you off balance for a week. Berlin is not a static thing. It is a project that is always in progress and never finished, and 3 years of learning it still leaves you regularly discovering that something you knew was accurate is no longer accurate. Second delivery, a compound preparation for a man named Bauer on Gormannstrasse, across the Rosenthaler Platz. The Platz is busy. It's always busy. The water pump in the centre of the square has a line of women with jugs and buckets and ceramic containers, all waiting, all talking, all conducting the daily business of neighbourhood information exchange that happens at water sources in every city in the world. Who's sick? Whose husband hasn't come home? Whether the price of bread has gone up again, and it has, because the war news affects the price of flour in ways that feel distant from the military reality, but are immediate in the kitchen. You wait your turn at the pump sometimes, for the shop's supply and for your own. You know some of these women by face. You exchange the nod that passes for greeting in this city, where everyone is slightly too busy and slightly too pressed by circumstance to invest in more. The water from this pump comes from the Spree, filtered somewhat through the ground, not purified in any modern sense. The cholera of last year, 1865, and again a smaller wave this year, moved through the city via the water supply, via exactly these communal pumps, via the interlocking system of privies and cesspits and ground infiltration that connects every household on this block to every other household in ways that nobody has yet fully mapped. Virko knows, or suspects strongly enough that knows is not too strong a word. He's been fighting for sewage reform in Berlin since the 1840s, through the medical establishment, through the Berlin City Council on which he now sits. He has made enemies. He has made progress. The progress is slow and the enemies are quick, and meanwhile the pumps continue to serve water that has passed through ground, that has absorbed everything the city's population has discarded. You carry water from this pump every other day. You drink it boiled, because Schönberg's standing rule is that all drinking water in the shop is boiled, and because you've read enough Virchow to understand why, even if you can't quite articulate the mechanism yet the way Koch will articulate it 15 years from now. The walk to Gormannstrasse takes you past a Mietskasenin, one of the new tenement barracks that are spreading through the working-class neighbourhoods of Berlin with the speed and regularity of an architectural plague. The building is 5 stories, filling the entire block face, grey stone facade with narrow windows set close together. Every window has something in it. A potted plant, a cage with something inside it that might be a bird, laundry on a line strung between the window latch, and something you can't see inside. The number of windows suggests the number of apartments, and the number of apartments suggests a density of habitation that the building's designers either accounted for or deliberately didn't think too hard about. The courtyard, visible through the arched entrance because the heavy door is propped open, is the true measure of the building. The Hinterhof, the back courtyard that these tenements always have, enclosed on 4 sides, where the real life of the building happens. Communal pump in the centre, communal privy at the far end, a small structure behind a half door that does not fully contain the smell, even from the entrance arch 20 metres away. Children playing near the pump, making a game of the mud. A man sitting on a crate with his coat off despite the cool morning, looking at nothing with the specific unfocused gaze of someone whose body has arrived but whose mind is somewhere else. 300 people, perhaps more, sharing the pump and the privy and the small strip of sky visible between the 5-story walls. This is the city that Dr. Hartmann's patients come from. This is the body that gets the calomel. You've done the reading on this too. You know that tuberculosis is the dominant cause of death in these buildings. That respiratory disease in general follows the density of habitation the way water follows gravity. That the children who grow up here in poorly ventilated rooms with insufficient light and water that has travelled through shared ground have immune systems that are working very hard from a very early age. That a child who looks thin and pale and listless might be showing the early signs of something real and structural, rather than something fixable with a strychnine tonic. This is something else that separates the knowing from the able to act. You cannot tell the woman from this morning that the treatment is wrong without the scientific framework to prove why it's wrong, and you do not yet fully have that framework, and neither does anyone else. All you have is doubt, which is, as it turns out, the beginning of science, but not yet the result of it. Bauer lives on the 3rd floor of a building on Gormannstrasse that is a step above the Mietskasernen and a step below the buildings where merchants live, the in-between world of Berlin's artisan class. Skilled workers who have enough to afford their own room and sometimes a second one, who are not destitute but for whom the margin between adequate and desperate is narrow enough to feel on bad nights. He's a clockmaker. You know this because his apartment, when he opens the door, reveals a back room visible through the open interior door that contains the precise, organized universe of a man whose professional relationship with time is very intimate. Tools arranged on felt-covered boards on the walls, small parts in labelled glass containers. On the workbench, the opened movement of something that might be a pocket watch or something slightly larger, its mechanisms exposed and gleaming under the lamp he keeps burning, even in daytime for the quality of the light. Bauer himself is 50, solid in the way of a man who's done physical work for decades, with hands that are large for a clockmaker, you always think, until you watch him work and understand that large hands, guided by good eyes and long, practice are perfectly adequate for fine work. He has a liver complaint. Schoenberg has prescribed for it conservatively, a compound preparation of gentian and dandelion root that supports digestion and has the advantage of being exactly as dangerous as drinking slightly bitter water, which is to say, not dangerous at all. But Bauer has also been seeing someone else. You know this because last month, when you came with the regular delivery, there was a different bottle on the shelf near his kitchen. Blue glass, paper label, a printed design rather than handwriting, advertising something called Lebenstropfen, life drops. The label claimed efficacy against liver complaints, kidney weakness, digestive disorders, fatigue, and general weakening of the vital forces, which is a phrase that covers so much ground it's almost useless, but is also almost impossible to argue with. You'd pick the bottle up. The content smelled of alcohol and something you couldn't quite place, which usually means either a proprietary blend of herbs or something the manufacturer doesn't want you to identify. You'd put it back without saying anything. Today, there are 2 of the blue bottles. Bauer pours you a glass of water without asking, which is his habit, and you drink it without thinking too hard about where it came from, which is increasingly your habit in situations where thinking would result in going thirsty. "How is Herr Schoenberg?" Bauer asks. "Well, he sends his regards." "And the preparation is the same as last month?" "The same." Bauer looks at the package you've placed on his table, then at the 2 blue bottles. He's not an unobservant man. He knows what you're looking at. "My brother-in-law in Spandau," he says. "He had the same thing. Liver. Worse than mine," the physician said. "He took the Lebenstropfen for 3 months and now he's better." You consider how to respond to this. The Lebenstropfen is what it is. A patent medicine, a Geheimmittel, a proprietary preparation, sold without a prescription and without a licensed pharmacist's oversight. The kind of thing Schoenberg describes in the same neutral voice he uses for Dr. Hartmann. The voice that means I have opinions I am currently choosing not to express. The brother-in-law in Spandau may have genuinely improved. Liver complaints of the kind Bauer describes are often self-limiting. The body resolves them with time and reduced alcohol intake and reduced dietary fat. The Lebenstropfen, consumed over the same period, gets the credit. This is how patent medicines build their reputation. Not through fraud, always, though fraud is present. Mostly through the natural history of disease, which is that many illnesses get better on their own, and whatever the patient was taking when they got better gets credited with the cure. "It's good that your brother-in-law is better," you say. Bauer nods. He's looking at you the way people look at you when they know you haven't said the thing they're waiting for you to say. "Herr Schoenberg's preparation," he says. "You think it's better than the Lebenstropfen?" And here is the choice. You can give him the professional answer, the deferential answer, the answer that protects Schoenberg's business relationship and stays inside the appropriate boundaries of an apprentice's role. or you can tell him something true. Herr Schoenberg's preparation, you say carefully, contains ingredients whose effects on the liver and digestive system are documented in medical literature. The dosages are calibrated to your specific condition by someone who has examined you. The Lebenstropfen, you look at the blue bottle, contains alcohol and whatever else is in the proprietary blend. I don't know what that is. Neither does anyone outside the manufacturer's office. Bauer is quiet for a moment. That sounds like you think the Lebenstropfen is bad. I think it is unverifiable, you say, which is not the same as bad. It may be perfectly harmless. It may even help. I genuinely don't know. Another pause. The physician said I should try it. Dr. Hartmann. Of course, Dr. Hartmann said that. Dr. Hartmann is a licensed physician, you say. His recommendation means something. But Herr Schoenberg doesn't stock it. Herr Schoenberg doesn't stock preparations whose contents he can't verify. Bauer picks up the blue bottle and turns it in his hands. The label has a small engraving of a vigorous-looking man in a posture suggesting robust health, which is the same engraving on approximately 100 different patent medicines sold in Berlin. My wife takes it too, Bauer says, for her nerves. His wife's nerves. You think about that. The patent medicine industry in Prussia in 1866 has identified women's nervous conditions as one of its primary markets. Nervenstärkungsmittel, Beruhigungstropfen, preparations promising calm, rest, relief from the anxiety and exhaustion that are apparently endemic among women of the middle and working classes, which they are because the lives these women are living are genuinely anxious and exhausting. And the preparations sold for their nerves contain, frequently, laudanum, opium dissolved in alcohol, which does produce calm. It produces calm the way a hammer produces silence, effectively, immediately, and with potential for significant structural damage depending on how long you keep swinging it. Is she taking it regularly, you ask? Every day, Bauer says, for 2 months. It helps. How much does she take? He looks at the label. A tablespoon in the morning and 1 in the evening. You do the mental arithmetic. The bottle contains how much. A tablespoon is how much. If the laudanum concentration is what you'd estimate from the smell and the effects described, tell her, you say, not to take more than the label says, and tell her to take it with food. This is not adequate advice. What you should tell him is, tell her to stop. What you should tell him is, find me the bottle, let me smell it. Let me try to work out what's in it. What you should tell him is laudanum dependence is a real thing, and 2 months is long enough for the nervous system to begin expecting the dose. But you are an apothecary's apprentice. You have a delivery box and a list. You are 19 years old and Bauer is 50, and this is his home, and his wife and his choice, and the profession and the city and the year you're living in do not give you a different language for this conversation. I'll tell her, Bauer says. His tone suggests he might. You pick up the delivery box and take your leave. On the stairs, you stand still for a moment and breathe. The smell of the building, coal and cabbage and human life. Below you, a child is crying and then not crying. Above you, something heavy is being moved across a floor. You go down the stairs and out into the street, and the city swallows you back up. The 3rd and 4th deliveries take you south and east toward the Spandauer Vorstadt and down along Neue Friedrichstrasse in the direction of the Alexanderplatz. Berlin in June of 1866 is doing something complicated with itself. The city's population has been growing faster than any other city in the German states for 30 years. It was 400,000 in 1850. It is 700,000 now. In 20 years it will be over 1 million. The physical evidence of this growth is everywhere you look. Scaffolding on buildings that are simultaneously being built and extended and repaired. New streets being punched through neighbourhoods that weren't designed for the volume of traffic they're carrying. Workers everywhere, hands dusty or wet or stained with whatever material they're working with. And war noise now layered over everything else. Not the noise of battle, which is hundreds of kilometres away in Bohemia. The noise of preparation and absence. The conspicuous gaps where men of military age aren't because they've been called up or volunteered. The women at the water pumps talking about husbands in the Landwehr. The newsboy at the Alexanderplatz corner whose voice carries the specific pitch of someone trying to sell urgency. Krieg. Preußen marschiert. The war, always the war. Berlin in wartime is a city that doesn't know yet whether it has something to fear. The political situation is complicated enough that even well-informed people have difficulty explaining why Prussia is fighting Austria over Schleswig-Holstein, which is what Schönberg tried to explain to you last week, and which you followed approximately 3/4 of and nodded through the rest. What you understand is, there are soldiers in the streets, and there are fewer men at the water pumps, and the newspapers are full of it, and the city breathes differently when war is present. The way a person breathes differently when something is wrong that they haven't yet identified. The Alexanderplatz. You've crossed it hundreds of times. It is one of the places Berlin sharpens itself to a point. Everything converges. Street vendors in the surrounding streets, the market stalls, the constant traffic of carts and coaches and pedestrians, the noise of the city concentrated into a space that somehow contains it all without rupturing. The smell here is different from the residential streets. More food, hot bread from a stall in the market, fried potatoes from a vendor with a portable brazier, the sweet, heavy smell of someone selling boiled sweets from a glass case. More animals. The horses of the cabs and delivery wagons. The pigs that still, in some corners of Berlin in 1866, root through the refuse behind the market stalls. More noise from more simultaneous directions than you can track individually. A man is standing on a crate, not the newsboy. This man is older, 45 perhaps, with a large frame and the kind of presence that fills more space than the physical body justifies. He's dressed well but not elaborately, a good coat, a broad-brimmed hat. He's holding a bottle and talking to the small crowd that has gathered at a natural pause in the market traffic. You slow down because a crowd usually means something worth seeing, or, failing that, something worth cataloguing. The man is selling medicine. Specifically, he's selling Dr. Rathkes Wunderbalsam für alle Beschwerden des Blutes, der Nerven und der inneren Organe. Dr. Rathkes' miraculous balm for all complaints of the blood, nerves and internal organs. You stop completely. The crowd is maybe 20 people, mostly women, a few older men, a couple of young workers on what looks like a mid-morning break from somewhere nearby, hands still carrying the dust of their trade. They are listening with the particular attention that people give to someone who is describing their exact problem with exactly the vocabulary they've been waiting for. Because that's what the man with the bottle, Dr. Rathke presumably, or someone performing that role is doing. He's describing suffering, very specifically. The aching joints that make it hard to rise in the morning, the heaviness of the stomach after meals, the nerves that give no rest, the sleep that doesn't restore, the persistent sense of exhaustion that no amount of rest seems to touch. Each description produces a small visible response in the crowd. The woman nearest you, her arms crossed over her chest in the stance of someone who came to the market for something else and stopped against her better judgment, nods at the aching joints. The older man, 3 people to your right, shifts his weight when the stomach heaviness is mentioned. Rathke, you've decided that's probably not his real name, has a technique. He doesn't oversell. He doesn't make promises that are obviously impossible. He describes the suffering accurately because the suffering is real and the people in front of him live with it, and then he offers the bottle as something that has helped others. He brings out a testimonial, a woman in the crowd, not someone who came forward, but someone who was apparently already there, waiting for this moment, speaks up about how the Wunderbalsam helped her husband's blood complaint that 3 physicians had failed to treat. Her manner is not theatrical. It's conversational, the way one woman at a pump tells another about something that worked. The specificity is persuasive. The husband was having trouble with his lower back and fatigue for 2 winters. They tried this doctor and that doctor. Someone recommended the Wunderbalsam. 3 months of use, the back pain has improved significantly. You watch this with professional attention. The testimonial is plausible because it's specific. Vague testimonials are easy to disbelieve. This one has details, 2 winters, lower back, 3 months of use. It sounds true because it might be true. The man's back pain might have genuinely improved. The improvement might have nothing to do with the Wunderbalsam and everything to do with the natural resolution of a muscular complaint or a change in his work conditions or the placebo effect, which is more powerful and more real than anyone in this crowd understands, because the science of the placebo effect hasn't been systematically studied yet. But he might feel better. He probably does feel better, and the Wunderbalsam gets the credit. Rathke holds up the bottle. It's impressive. Deep green glass, elegant shape, gold-coloured foil around the neck. The label is professionally printed with the kind of design that suggests legitimacy without being able to be directly investigated. 1 mark, 20 pfennig, he says. The cost of 2 days' bread for the health of your blood for the next 6 weeks. 1 mark 20. For a family on a worker's income, that's not negligible. But it's also not impossible. It's calibrated exactly to what someone can stretch to if they believe hard enough. The woman with the crossed arms uncrosses them. You see the decision moving across her face. She buys. Then the older man buys. Then one of the young workers, who you would have bet wouldn't, but who has the look of someone buying on behalf of someone else. A mother or a wife with a complaint that matches what Rathke just described. You watch 8 people buy Dr. Rathke's Wunderbalsam in 4 minutes. At 1 mark 20 each, that's 9 marks 60. Not nothing. Not for this crowd, not for this part of Berlin. Rathke's assistant, a boy about your age who's been maintaining the supply of bottles from a case, hands over the purchases with a manner that is friendly and quick without inviting extended conversation. You approach, not the boy, but Rathke himself, who is pocketing coins with the practiced efficiency of someone who's been doing this for years. What's in it, you ask? Rathke looks at you. He has the look of a man who's very good at reading people quickly. You're a chemist's apprentice, he says. It's not a question. Apothecary. Ah, he smiles. The smile has several components. Then you know better than most people that nature provides remedies that the official pharmacopoeia hasn't had time to fully investigate. I know that miraculous balm for all complaints is a phrase that means nothing specific, you say, and that the law against Geheimmittel is supposed to prevent preparations with undisclosed ingredients from being sold. The law is real. It is also approximately as effective as most laws in 1866 Prussia. that depend on consistent enforcement. The ingredients are disclosed on the label, Rathke says pleasantly. Plants of the forest and valley, mineral waters from the springs of... The springs of where? A slight pause. The label names the springs. You look at the bottle the boy is handing to the woman who just bought one. The label does name springs. Springs in the Harz Mountains, which are real springs, but which are 400 kilometers away and which have no particular therapeutic quality that has been documented in any pharmacological text you've encountered. Does it contain laudanum, you ask? No. Mercury compounds? Absolutely not. Alcohol? A small quantity. As a preservative? Very small. He looks at you with the expression of a man who has had this conversation before and considers it a minor obstacle in an otherwise productive morning. Young man, the medicine your employer sells, does every preparation in his shop have a complete scientific literature supporting every ingredient? You pause. This is infuriatingly a better question than it should be, because the answer is no. Some of Schoenberg's preparations are fully documented. Some are traditional, based on decades of observed use, which is not the same as rigorous scientific documentation. The line between traditional medicine that works and traditional medicine that we haven't proven yet, and traditional medicine that doesn't work and we haven't disproven yet, is genuinely blurry in 1866, even in the most scientifically serious pharmacy in Berlin. No, you say. But he doesn't claim his preparations cure everything. He compounds for specific conditions at specific doses based on examination of the patient. And my customers, Rathke says, come to me because their conditions were not resolved by those specific preparations for specific conditions. Because they have been examined by physicians and given treatments that did nothing or that made things worse, and they are still suffering. He leans slightly toward you. His voice drops to the register of someone sharing information rather than performing. I have been selling this preparation for 4 years. I have letters from people in Breslau and Hamburg and here in Berlin who say it helped them when nothing else did. I have no way to prove the mechanism, but neither can you prove it doesn't work. He straightens, pats his coat pocket where the coins are. Good day to you, apprentice. He turns away to the next customer. You stand there for a moment with the delivery box in your hands, watching him sell. The crowd has renewed itself. New people who've come for the market have drifted over, drawn by the social gravity of a gathering. Rathke is describing symptoms again, his voice finding the exact register of a man who understands suffering and wants to help. He's not entirely wrong, which is almost the worst thing about him. The rest of the delivery route takes you south toward the Spandauer Brücke and then back west along the river, and by the time you reach the 5th stop, a woman named Lotte Fischer on the 3rd floor of a building on Heilige Geiststrasse. You've been walking for an hour and a half, and the box is almost empty, and your mind is still turning over the conversation at the Alexanderplatz. Lotte Fischer is 60, a widow, with a daughter who comes on Sundays and otherwise leaves her mother to manage. She has a cardiac complaint, not as serious as Frau Henning's, but real. A slight irregularity in the rhythm that Schoenberg monitors without alarm but with attention. She gets a very mild preparation, more herbal than pharmaceutical, that Schoenberg has prescribed primarily to give her something to take, rather than because he believes it will change the cardiac picture significantly. He's told you this directly, in one of those moments when he speaks to you not as an apprentice but as a professional in training. Sometimes the act of treating is more important than the content of the treatment. Patients who believe they are being cared for heal better, who rest better, who eat better, who report their symptoms more accurately at follow-up. The therapeutic relationship is a factor in treatment outcomes that the medical literature doesn't know how to measure yet, and therefore largely ignores. This is true, you believe it. But it sits uncomfortably next to Rathke at Alexanderplatz, selling the same logic at a market stall. Lotte Fischer opens her door and you hand over the packet, and she looks at you the way she always looks at you, which is with an expression suggesting she's deciding whether to be disappointed or not, and hasn't reached a conclusion. "You're thinner than last month," she says. "I don't think so." "You are. You're not eating enough. Tell Herr Schönberg to feed his apprentices properly." "I eat fine, Frau Fischer." "You're from the country," she says, as though this is an argument. "Country boys need proper food. You should eat more. You've been in Berlin for 3 years. You're not sure country boy still applies, but you know from experience that Lotte Fischer will not be persuaded of this. "I'll tell Herr Schönberg," you say. "Good." She takes the packet. "Tell him I'll see him Thursday." She closes the door. You stand in the stairwell for a moment. Through the building's walls, which are thinner than they should be, you can hear the building living. Upstairs, a man's voice, methodical, unhurried, reading something aloud, possibly a newspaper. 2 floors below, children, the specific high-pitched negotiation of siblings over an object that both want. Outside, the street, wheels on stone, a horse's complaint about something, distant church bells marking the half hour. The city breathes. You breathe with it. The Charité Hospital is visible from 2 streets away. A complex of buildings behind a wall on the Lusenstrasse. Its main gate the kind of structure that says institution before anything else can be read about it. Grey stone. Proportions that suggest permanence. The main building 4 stories, its windows evenly spaced, its facade the architecture of serious purpose. You don't have business there today, but you're close, and you have time before you need to be back, and you've been making excuses to walk past the Charité for 2 years, not to go in. An apothecary's apprentice has no official business at the most important medical institution in Prussia, but to stand outside the gate and look, and sometimes, when the gate is open and the traffic of physicians and nurses and medical students is sufficient, to slip inside the courtyard and stand in the shade of the wall and watch. The smell of the Charité courtyard is different from the smell of the city. The antiseptic preparations that are now, haltingly, being adopted in some of the wards have their own character. Carbolic acid, which has a sharp, almost petroleum smell, and which Virchow's students have been arguing over because Lister's work on antiseptic surgery is only a year old, and the debate in Germany about whether the germ theory that underlies it is correct is ongoing and contentious. This morning the courtyard is moving with the usual mid-morning traffic. Medical students in groups, recognisable by their age and their air of combined confidence and ignorance that you recognise because you have it too. Nurses, identifiable by their uniform, walking with purpose. A physician in a tall hat talking to another physician, both of them carrying the kind of leather bag that means they've been on rounds. On the steps of the main building, a man is examining a patient, not inside, on the steps. The patient is a man of about 50, sitting hunched with his coat off despite the morning cool, while the physician crouches in front of him and conducts an examination that involves looking at the eyes and feeling the glands of the throat and pressing with both thumbs on the upper abdomen while watching the patient's face. What you're watching is a physical examination. You've seen Schönberg do versions of this. You've been taught the basics, what normal looks like, what abnormal looks like, what variations suggest what conditions. But the physician on the steps has a technique that is different from what Schoenberg has shown you. His movements are more systematic, more precise. Each step seems to follow from the previous one with a logic you can almost trace, even from this distance. You've been reading Virchow's papers. You know his principle. All disease originates in cells, and the physical examination is the physician's first tool for accessing what the cells are doing. This physician is practicing something close to what Virchow preaches. Every touch is information. Every response is data. A medical student standing near the steps is writing in a notebook, fast, keeping up with observations being dictated in a low voice. You watch this for several minutes. What you're watching is the future, or part of the future, the part that says, look at the body, listen to the body, gather facts before applying theory. The problem is that the future is not complete yet. The physical examination has been refined by Virchow and his generation, but the tools to translate physical findings into cellular understanding are still being developed. The microscope is in use, but its application to diagnostic medicine is early. The specific pathogens, the bacterial organisms that cause cholera and tuberculosis and typhoid, have not yet been identified. Koch won't find the tuberculosis bacillus for another 16 years. Koch won't find the cholera vibrio for 17. The physician on the steps has good hands and a good method. He will still prescribe things that will harm patients, because the tools to distinguish harmful from helpful don't exist yet in the forms that would make the distinction clear, and Rathke at the Alexanderplatz will still sell his Wunderbelsum, which may or may not harm patients, but which will take their money and their attention, and sometimes delay their seeking care that might actually help. Both things are true simultaneously. Both things are happening in the same city on the same morning. You pick up your delivery box and walk back toward Linienstrasse. The boy from Sophienstrasse is sitting on the customer stool when you return. He's 8 years old, you know, but he sits with the stillness of someone older. The kind of stillness that comes not from calm, but from the body's economy. When you don't have a lot of energy, you don't spend it on movement you don't need to make. His mother sits next to him, her hands folded, looking at Schoenberg with the particular attention of a woman who's made a decision and is waiting for someone to notice. I've been reading, she says, when Schoenberg finishes the brief examination he conducts on every visit. This is how she opens it, simply without apology. And, Schoenberg says, I read that some physicians believe strychnine preparations in children can cause nervous complaints, twitching, muscle spasms, sleep disturbances. She looks at her son. Ernst has been twitching in his sleep. The shop is very quiet. You're behind the counter, very still, holding a pen you picked up to record the delivery without realizing you're holding it. Schoenberg looks at Ernst. The boy looks back at him with those two still eyes. How long has he been twitching? 3 weeks. I didn't connect it to the tonic until last week, when my sister told me what she'd read. Schoenberg is quiet for a moment. He picks up a glass bottle from the counter, turns it in his fingers, and places it down again. A gesture that means he's thinking carefully, and wants you to see him thinking carefully. The strychnine in the tonic, he says, is at a therapeutic dose, the kind of dose that physicians have used for, I know what you'll say, the woman says, and there is something in her voice that is not aggression, but is absolutely immovable. I know that physicians have used it for years, but Ernst is not getting better. He was not getting better before the tonic, and he is not getting better with the tonic, and now he is twitching in his sleep, and I would like to try something different. A long pause, You're aware that you're breathing very quietly, that you've gone entirely still behind the counter. What would you like to try? Schoenberg asks. The woman reaches into her bag and produces a folded paper, a doctor's letterhead, and on it, in handwriting that slopes slightly to the right, a prescription. Dr. Langfeld at the Charité recommended this, she says. Schoenberg takes the paper, reads it again. You can see the prescription from where you're standing. It is not a stimulant tonic. It is an iron and cod liver oil preparation, the kind of straightforward nutritional support that a physician who has studied Virchow's nutritional pathology papers would prescribe for a child showing signs of deficiency. No strychnine, no active pharmaceutical in it that could cause harm. Dr. Langfeld is thorough, Schoenberg says carefully. He was very kind, the woman says. He examined Ernst for 30 minutes. He said the problem is likely nutritional, that Ernst needs better food and sunlight in the iron preparation, and that stimulant tonics are not indicated. Not indicated. The language of Charité medicine. Clean, specific, unequivocal. Schoenberg places the prescription on the counter. I can prepare this, he says. I would like you to prepare this, she says. He goes to the laboratory. You hear him moving, the measured sounds of a man working with a precision that never leaves him, even when everything else is complicated. You look at Ernst, who has watched this entire exchange with the stillness of a child who's learned that adults contain more complexity than they usually show. Does your back hurt? You ask him. He looks at you with mild surprise. Children aren't usually asked questions directly in the presence of their parents. Sometimes, he says, in the morning or at night. Both. You nod. Make a mental note that the back pain is consistent with the nutritional deficiency picture, rather than the weakness of vital forces picture that the strychnine tonic was treating. Not that you're in a position to say this to anyone officially. You should eat more eggs, you say. If you can. Ernst looks at you with the patient gaze of a child being told something by an adult who doesn't know his actual circumstances. We don't have eggs, he says, simply, without self-pity. You don't say anything else. Schoenberg comes back with the preparation. The woman pays. They leave. The shop door closes and there is a moment of quiet that contains more than quiet usually contains. Then Schoenberg says, without turning from where he's standing at the counter, "Write it in the register." "Yes, sir." And he pauses. Picks up the glass bottle again. The same one from before, and this time sets it down on the shelf behind the counter rather than the counter itself. Tomorrow morning I'm going to revise the standard pediatric tonic preparation. He says it to the shelf of bottles, not to you. Yes, sir. There's nothing else to say. The revision should have happened years ago, and Schoenberg knows it, and the fact that it's happening now, prompted by a mother who did her own reading, is not nothing. It is in fact the way medicine has always changed, and will always change. Not only from the top down, from the brilliant researchers to the practitioners, but from the bottom up, from the patients who are living in their bodies and who notice things. But the boy who was twitching in his sleep for 3 weeks first. The early afternoon is preparation work. The counter is quiet after midday. The morning rush of patients and regular customers tapers. Schoenberg takes a meal at 12:30, a precise 20 minutes, always at the table in the back room, always alone. You eat standing at the counter, a roll from the baker 2 buildings down and a cup of tea made from the water that's been boiling in the small pot on the spirit lamp. The tea is weak and slightly bitter and hot, which is what you need. Then compounding. This is the part of the work that involves the mortar. You've been grinding things in that mortar for 3 years, and your relationship with it has moved through several stages. The first stage was learning the physical technique, how the weight of the pestle works, how the angle of your wrist affects the particle size, how much time different materials need, and how you know when you're done. Stage 2 was understanding the chemistry, what you're doing to the material structurally when you grind it, why particle size matters for absorption, why certain things need to be kept cold while ground and others need warmth. Stage 3, which you're in now, is a kind of intimacy with the materials themselves. You know the resistance of dried root versus powdered mineral. You know the way resins change their grinding character depending on ambient temperature. Today the compounding list is long. Schoenberg's weekend preparation run, the standard preparations that are always in stock. You start with the gentian compound, dried gentian root, which smells of something between earth and old wood, ground to a fine powder and combined with prepared chalk and a small quantity of bismuth. The smell as you work it is complex, the root's bitterness releasing into the air, the chalk contributing almost nothing but presence, the bismuth with its faint metallic edge. Your hands work automatically. Wrist, pressure, turn, the pestle against the mortar, a repetitive sound that fills the laboratory in a way you find genuinely calming, which says something about 3 years of doing this particular task, the chamomile preparation. Less grinding, more pressing, extracting the volatile oils from dried flower heads by hand compression into a ceramic dish. The release of the characteristic smell, which is nothing like cheap chamomile tea, is warm and slightly fruity and unexpectedly complex. Your hands, the skin between the thumb and index finger of the right hand, has been rough for a year. The combination of chemical exposure and the mechanical work and the frequent washing has produced a texture that no amount of the hand salve you compound for customers fully addresses. You've tried the salve, it helps for a day, and then the roughness returns. You've accepted this as part of the work. The mercury ointment preparation. You put on the thick rubber gloves that Schoenberg purchased from a surgical supplier 2 years ago, over your protest that they make the work difficult, and you are careful, and you do not touch your face while working, and you ventilate the laboratory by opening the back window, and you complete the preparation with the precision of someone who understands that precision here is a hedge against a particular kind of harm. The smell of mercury metal is nothing. It is the compounds that smell. The chloride has a sharp, almost sweet chemical odour. The sulfide is warmer, earthy. What you're working with now is the metallic mercury emulsified into a base of larded beeswax, a product of several steps including a mercury mill that Schoenberg has had since before you arrived, and which requires careful cleaning after use. Your gloved hands, the rubber is stiff and reduces your sensitivity. You compensate with visual attention, watching what your hands are doing rather than feeling it. The scales for weighing the mercury are on a separate small bench, away from everything else, and are cleaned after every use with dilute acid solution. When the ointment is done and sealed and labelled and the workbench is cleaned and the gloves are removed carefully and your hands washed twice, you stand at the back window for a moment and breathe the outdoor air. The alley behind the building contains a drain of uncertain function, a pile of something covered with an old canvas, and a cat who is sitting on a wall watching you with the expression cats maintain that suggests they have already evaluated you and found the result adequate but not impressive. You and the cat look at each other for a moment. The mercury ointment is going to be prescribed to at least 3 customers. 2 for skin conditions that may genuinely respond to it. 1 for what is almost certainly syphilis, which nobody has said directly, but which the symptom pattern in the notes is not ambiguous about. The mercury will do something for the syphilis in the short term, in the sense that the mercury's systemic effects do suppress some of the symptoms. It will also do something else over time, the something else being mercury poisoning, which in the early stages looks enough like a bad day, and in the later stages looks enough like other things, that the connection requires a careful clinician and careful documentation. Virchow is careful, the physicians at the Charité are careful, Schönberg is careful. The system as a whole is not careful enough. This is not cynicism, it is observation. At 2 o'clock, Schönberg calls you into the front of the shop. He's standing behind the counter with a small jar in his hand. The jar contains a grey-white paste that you recognise. The newest delivery from a pharmaceutical supplier in Leipzig. A new preparation that's been sent as a sample, bismuth nitrate paste, bismuth nitrate paste, being marketed as a treatment for gastric inflammation. What do you know about bismuth? Schönberg asks. This is a teaching mode. You recognise it. It precipitates protein, you say. In the gut lining, it forms a protective layer over irritated surfaces. It's used in several preparations for side effects. At low doses, minimal. At higher doses, bismuth toxicity is possible. Neurological symptoms, skin discoloration, in severe cases encephalopathy. And the dose in this preparation, you look at the label, do the calculation. It's in the therapeutic range, conservative even. Good. He sets the jar down. What would you compare it to? Compared to the traditional chalk and gentian compound, probably more effective for acute inflammation, less effective for chronic dyspepsia, where the gentian's bitter action is more appropriate. Compared to the mercury compound some physicians use for the same condition, you pause. Vastly safer, Schönberg nods. This is the answer you wanted. We will stock it, he says, on the 3rd shelf between the bismuth subgallet and the carbonate, and when a customer comes in with an acute gastric complaint, you may recommend it in preference to the older preparations. This is a significant statement. Schönberg does not update his recommendations lightly. The fact that he's doing it now, based on a sample from a Leipzig supplier, tells you something about how he thinks. The evidence is in the preparation's documented effects. The dosage calculation is within acceptable ranges. The existing evidence base from trials the supplier has sent with the sample is sufficient for a preliminary adoption. This is how good pharmacy works. Slowly, with evidence, with caution. It is also the mechanism by which bad pharmacy works. Slowly, with the appearance of evidence, with the language of caution deployed in service of a conclusion already reached. Rathke at the Alexanderplatz also had documentation. Letters from satisfied customers in Breslau and Hamburg. Testimonials of the specific named variety. The difference between Rathke's documentation and the Leipzig supplier's documentation is the same as the difference between Schönberg and Rathke. One is attempting to understand the mechanism, and one is documenting the effect and moving on. Mechanism matters. Without understanding why something works, you cannot safely predict when it will work and when it will do something unexpected. But you cannot always explain this to the woman at the market who needs something and whose money runs to 1 mark 20 and not to a Charité consultation. The shop closes at 6. Schoenberg counts the till with the expression of a man conducting a rite, not a commercial activity. Each coin has its place. The register is updated, the ledger closed. He locks the strongbox in the cabinet below the counter, locks the cabinet and stands for a moment looking at the locked door the way he sometimes looks at the shelves of bottles, seeing something you can't see. The woman from this morning, he says, with the child. She came back at 4, while you were doing the afternoon deliveries. You wait. The boy's slightly better. The colour is improving. He turns away from the cabinet. I've written to Dr. Hartmann. This is significant. Schoenberg writing to Dr. Hartmann is the polite professional communication that says, I believe one of your patients has been harmed by one of your prescriptions without saying it directly. Because saying it directly in 1866 professional medicine would accomplish less than saying it indirectly and well. Did you mention the calomel? I mentioned my observations of the patient and my clinical concerns regarding the duration and dosage of the current treatment. I recommended discontinuation and suggested a review. Diplomatically stated, professionally actionable, the minimum necessary. Do you think he'll listen? Schoenberg picks up his coat from the hook by the laboratory door. Dr. Hartmann has been practicing for 30 years and has his own opinions, he says. Whether he listens will depend on whether his next opportunity to observe the patient confirms or denies what I've written. He puts on the coat. Write it all in the register, everything. Yes, sir. He goes upstairs. You hear his footsteps on the ceiling above, the specific rhythm of a man moving from the top of one day to the preparation for the next. The evening routine. You sweep the front of the shop, mop the laboratory floor with the diluted carbolic solution that Schoenberg introduced 18 months ago, and whose smell you no longer notice. You check the stock against the preparation list for tomorrow. 3 items need to be ordered. 2 items are running low. 1 item can be compounded from existing stock first thing in the morning. Outside, Linienstrasse is changing character. The commercial traffic of the day is settling. The evening traffic of people going home and going out is beginning. The smell from outside shifts. Less coal smoke as the factory chimneys bank for the evening. More cooking smells as the apartments above start their dinner preparations. Someone is frying onions somewhere. The smell comes under the shop door and turns the medical air of the apothecary briefly into something domestic, and you feel a physical response to it that is essentially hunger, a solid, definite hunger that you've been ignoring for 2 hours, and you realize you've had nothing since the roll at midday. You finish the mopping and you wash your hands and you go to the small kitchen in the back of the building that you share with Schoenberg and his wife, who arrives every evening from their apartment on Neue Schönhauser Strasse, to cook and manages the general domestic life of the shop premises with the same quiet precision Schoenberg brings to his pharmaceutical work. Frau Schoenberg is about 50, angular, with grey hair pulled back and eyes that are kind in the way of someone who has decided kindness is not an indulgence but a policy. She has never treated you as anything other than a full member of the household, which is not universal among masters' wives and which you've been aware enough to be grateful for. Tonight, Linsenentopf, lentil soup with bread. Simple, filling, hot. The soup has a bay leaf in it, and something smoky at the base that might be a ham hock, and you eat a full bowl and most of a second one standing at the kitchen table while Frau Schoenberg washes the pot. You saw the boy from Sophienstrasse today, she says, not a question. His mother changed the prescription. Good. She doesn't look up from the pot. I've thought for 6 months that preparation wasn't right for him. You look at her back. You've read Virchow? She makes a sound that might be a laugh. I've watched Schoenberg for 30 years. He revises his methods every 5 years or so when the evidence accumulates enough that he can't ignore it. This was overdue. She sets the pot on the rack. He knows more than he acts on sometimes. This is the most direct thing Frau Schoenberg has ever said about her husband's professional practice. You file it. Why, you ask? If he knows, why not act sooner? She dries her hands on a cloth and turns to look at you. Because knowing and being certain enough to act are different things, she says. And because the gap between I suspect this is wrong, and I will change what I've been doing for 20 years and advise my colleagues to change theirs, is wider than it looks from the outside. She hangs the cloth. He is not a coward. He is careful. Sometimes careful looks the same as slow. She goes to the door, pauses. The woman from this morning, the one with the sick child. Yes. The boy will be fine. She says it with the certainty of someone who has seen enough sick children to know the ones who will pull through. The colour was coming back. He's strong. He'll be fine. She goes upstairs. You eat the rest of your soup. You should go to bed. Tomorrow starts at 6 and the list of preparations for the morning is longer than usual. Instead, at 8 o'clock, you put on your coat and go out. The friend you're going to see is named Klaus Dreher, who is 22, 3 years older than you, and works at the printing house on Münchstrasse. You met him at the water pump 18 months ago, when both of you were waiting in the queue with jugs, and discovered simultaneously that you had both read the same pamphlet on Virchow's cellular theory, and had opinions about it, and a friendship was established on the strength of this coincidence. Dreher lives in a Mietskasernen on Dragonerstrasse, 3rd floor. The building you know by now, 5 stories, the courtyard with the communal pump, the smell that is the same as every building of this type but slightly specific to this one, a note of something chemical from the printing trade that Dreher carries home with him and deposits into the shared air of the stairwell. He's in when you knock, which is not guaranteed. Dreher's schedule has the complexity of someone who is managing a printing job, 3 friendships, 2 romantic situations he handles with more optimism than care, and an ongoing project of self-education from the public lending library on Georgenkirchstrasse. Come in, he says, already turning back to the table where he's writing. His room is 12 square meters, a narrow bed against one wall, the table and 2 chairs, a shelf with books, more than you'd expect for someone on a printer's wage, acquired from second-hand sellers and borrowed from the library and received as a result of the close relationship between printers and the printed word. A window that looks into the courtyard, currently showing the dimly lit square below where 2 women are talking near the pump. On the table, a half-written letter, an empty tea glass, and 3 pamphlets that you can see are the kind sold at the liberal political meetings that Dreher attends, and that Schoenberg has obliquely indicated might not be wise for you to attend. Have you eaten? Dreher asks without looking up. Yes. Good. He finishes his sentence with the specific deliberation of someone who does not interrupt their own writing mid-thought, sets down the pen, turns. What happened today? This is why you come here, because Dreher asks what happened and means it, and listens to the answer in the way that good listeners do, with his whole attention, making the connections you're making as you talk. You tell him about the morning, the woman with the sick child, the calomel, the boy from Sophienstrasse and the strychnine tonic, Rathke at the Alexanderplatz, the physician at the Charité steps. Dreher listens through all of it then, The problem is epistemological. You look at him. He reads too broadly for his own professional good and is sometimes insufferable about it. Meaning? Meaning the problem isn't that people don't know enough. The problem is that they don't know how to know what counts as evidence, what the difference is between a correlation and a cause. He picks up one of the pamphlets. The same problem in politics, actually. Someone says this policy produced this result, and nobody asks whether they've controlled for the other things that changed at the same time. Rathke at the market was doing something similar, you say, using the language of evidence without the method of evidence. Exactly. He has testimonials. He has before and after. He doesn't have mechanism. He doesn't have controlled comparison. And most of his customers don't have the framework to notice the difference. Neither did most physicians until very recently. Right. Dreher sits forward. So what's the difference between Rathke and your Herr Schönberg? You think about this. Schönberg revises, you say. When the evidence changes, he changes. He just changed tonight. He's revising the strychnine tonic because the evidence against it accumulated enough. Slowly, but he revises. You pause. I don't think Rathke revises. I think if you showed him evidence that the Wunderbalsam doesn't work, he would find a way to explain why the evidence is wrong. That's the distinguishing characteristic, Dreher says. Not certainty, not confidence. Whether they can be wrong, whether the evidence can change them. You sit with that for a while. Through the window, the two women at the pump have finished their conversation. The courtyard is quiet, almost dark, lit only by the windows above. Someone on an upper floor has left a lamp burning, and its yellow light catches the water surface in the pump basin. The child this morning, you say, the one with the calomel. You said he's better, not well. You look at the courtyard. He's better because his mother read something and changed course, not because the system changed. The system gave her calomel again the next time she sees Dr. Hartmann. Probably. And the system is also producing Virchow, is producing the Charité physicians who think like Virchow, is producing the evidence that will eventually change the system. Eventually. You stand because the hour is late and the morning is early. That's the cruelest word in medicine. Dreher walks you to the stairwell. The Rathke thing bothers you more than the Hartmann thing, he says. Why? You think. Because Hartmann is wrong and knows he can be wrong even if he's not revising fast enough, you say. Rathke is wrong and has structured his entire practice around the impossibility of being shown to be wrong. And which one does more harm? You're on the stairs now, hand on the banister that is slightly loose and always has been. Both of them, you say. Different harms. Dreher nods, leans on the doorframe. Same patients, though, he says. Same patients. Dragonerstrasse. At 9:30 is not dangerous, but it is dark in a way that requires navigation rather than walking. The gas lamps on Dragonerstrasse have not yet been extended to this block, and the light from the windows above is sufficient for shapes, but not for details. You know the route, right on Dragonerstrasse, past the entrance to the Mietskasernen, 2 buildings down where the courtyard pump is different from Dreher's, but serves the same neighbourhood, left at the corner where the wall of the building is marked by decades of people having turned that corner and worn the stone slightly smooth, straight along the block. The smell of the tannery on the parallel street reaching over the buildings into the more populated and therefore slightly more illuminated Rosenthaler Strasse. The city at night is a different city from the city in the day, not in the sense that it becomes dangerous, but in the sense that it reveals a different layer. The commercial city goes to sleep. the shops shuttered, the carts put away. The domestic city is still awake behind its windows, the light visible as warmth rather than illumination, suggesting life without exposing it. And the third city, the one that exists in the spaces between the first two, is conducting its own business. In the alley you pass by the tannery smell, a man sitting against a wall with his knees drawn up, not sleeping, looking at his own hands, the specific posture of exhaustion that has moved past rest and into something else. His clothes place him as a day labourer. His hands, visible even in low light, are cracked and swollen at the knuckles in the way of heavy physical work. He doesn't look at you as you pass. At the Rosenthaler Platz, the pump is attended even at this hour. A woman with 2 jugs, working efficiently in the lamp that serves the square, filling and balancing and setting off back toward her building with the practised ease of someone for whom this is a nightly errand, not a burden she notices anymore. You pass the corner where the gin shop used to be, before it was replaced by a coal merchant. The coal merchant smells of coal even with its shutters closed. The walls seem to have absorbed it. 2 buildings on, a tavern whose windows show amber light and emit the muted sound of 10 or 12 people in a space that seats 6 comfortably. Not your tavern. You don't have a tavern. Schönberg doesn't drink, and the social gravity of an apothecary's household runs toward tea in the kitchen rather than ale at the bar, which is not a complaint. You turn onto Linienstrasse and the shop is ahead. The building is dark except for 1 lamp in an upper window, Schönberg's, which is always the last light on in the building and sometimes the last light on the street. You let yourself in with the key. The shop in the dark is different again. The smell unchanged, camphor and alcohol and the deeper notes of the organic materials, but without the visual information of the labelled bottles, without the familiar shapes of the counter and shelves. It is more abstract, more purely chemical, more honest perhaps. You go to the back room, wash your hands and face in the cold water that has been cold all day, change out of the work clothes into the clothes you sleep in, which are the oldest shirt and the oldest trousers, and which have the smell of the shop built into them through 6 months of alternating use. The narrow bed, the straw mattress with its specific topography of worn spots and firm spots that you've mapped so thoroughly in 3 years that you can adjust automatically. The sounds of Linienstrasse settling. Above you, the cough from the 4th floor, the wet tearing sound worse than usual, going on longer than usual and then quiet and then again. And then quiet that holds. You lie on your back in the dark and look at a ceiling you can't see and think about what you know. You know that the woman from this morning will probably continue to see Dr. Hartmann. That doctor. Hartmann will probably prescribe calomel again for the next illness. That the boy with the slightly wrong-coloured face is better tonight, but will be sick again, because children in Berlin in 1866 get sick. It is what the city and the housing and the water supply and the crowding do to them, and the available medical responses are a mixture of genuinely helpful interventions and genuinely harmful ones, and much in between. You know that the Wunderbalsam Rathke is selling at the Alexanderplatz will be bought by people who need something and receive the Wunderbalsam instead, and that some of them will feel better, because feeling better is often what the body does when it's been given permission to rest, and that the Wunderbalsam will get the credit, and Rathke will have more letters for his testimonial file, and the cycle will continue. You know that Bauer's wife is taking laudanum every day, and that the dosage she's using is building a dependency that will become apparent at some point, probably a point after the patent medicine's visible benefits have faded, and that the withdrawal when it comes will be attributed to her original nervous complaint rather than to the treatment. You know that the physician at the Charité steps, with his systematic hands and his systematic method and his notebook writing student, is part of a generation that will change medicine in a way that will save millions of lives in the century coming. That Virchow's framework, Koch's future discoveries, Lister's antiseptic work beginning right now in Edinburgh, these things together constitute a revolution in what medicine can do for human bodies. You know that you are living in the interval, the before, the time when the revolution is beginning but has not yet restructured the practice, when the new science exists alongside the old practice in the same city, sometimes in the same shop, sometimes on the same shelf, separated by 18 inches and a generation of understanding, and here is what sits in you about all of it. The thing you've been trying to find words for since this morning, since the woman with the child and the calomel packet, since Rathke at the Alexanderplatz, since the physician at the Charité steps. The dangerous remedies were trusted not because people were foolish. They were trusted because they were all there was. Because the woman whose child isn't improving has to do something, and the physician has tools, and the tools are what they are, and the alternative to trusting the tools is trusting nothing. And trusting nothing while your child gets worse is not something most mothers can do. Belief in medicine is not a rational act in the pure sense. It is a human act. It is the act of a person who is suffering or watching suffering and needs to believe that the suffering is actionable, that it is not just something that happens to bodies, that there are responses. Rathke understood this. He understood it and used it, and Dr. Hartmann understood it and used it too, with better credentials and worse awareness of what he was doing. And Schoenberg, in his careful way, understood it and has spent 30 years trying to be worthy of it, trying to be the kind of thing that belief in medicine deserves, rather than the kind of thing it usually gets. The revision to the pediatric tonic, the letter to Dr. Hartmann, the bismuth preparation replacing the older one. These are small acts, incremental, insufficient, each one to the scale of the problem. But they are in the direction of the truth. The cough from the 4th floor is quiet now. Whoever lives up there is asleep or resting. Below the building, Linienstrasse is down to its minimum activity. The occasional cart, the occasional quick footsteps of someone still out at this hour with somewhere they need to be. Somewhere to the north, toward the Rosenthaler Platz, someone is having an argument. The voices carry in the night air without the day's noise to muffle them. You can't make out the words, just the shapes of them. The sharp rises note of anger, the flat counter note of defensive calm, and then quiet. Somewhere else, music. Faint, possibly from the tavern you passed. A fiddle, or something like a fiddle. The tune not quite identifiable, not quite anything. Just the suggestion of music from the direction of where people are still awake. The Charité Hospital, 2 kilometres northwest, has night staff on the wards right now. People in pain at this hour. People in the specific dark of illness at night, which is different from the dark of ordinary sleep. People being turned in their beds by tired nurses. People watching the ceiling the way you're watching it. Some of them are being treated with things that work, some with things that harm, some with things so far from either that harm and help are not the right categories for them, and all of them are, in some sense, participating in the same thing you are, the project of understanding what human bodies are, what they need, by the trial of living in them, by the daily experiment of being alive in 1866 Berlin. This city will kill a lot of people. It will also save a lot of people. It will sometimes do both to the same person in the same week. It is not a gentle place, but it is a real one, and it is where medicine is being invented and uninvented and reinvented in real time, in the hands of people trying to figure out what caring for a human body actually means. Ernst from Sophienstrasse will be better. Frau Schönberg said so. The tonic will be revised. The letter will reach Dr. Hartmann. Rathke will still be at the Alexanderplatz on Thursday. And you will be behind the counter at 6 in the morning, with clean hands and the pestle and the balance scale and the Latin names on the drawers, doing your best with the tools you have, learning what you can, writing everything in the register. The city outside is quieting. It never fully stops. Not Berlin, not in 1866, not in any year before or after. The spree doesn't stop. The gasworks on the east side of the city keep burning through the night to maintain pressure in the lines. The railway yards never empty entirely, but it quiets. And in the quiet, what you feel is something you don't have a precise word for in the Prussian German that is your native language. Something about being at the beginning of things, being in the room before the door opens. Virchow is alive right now. His office at the Friedrich Wilhelms Universität is 3 kilometers from where you're lying. He's been writing for 20 years about what cells are and what diseases, and what that means for how physicians should think, and the people who've been reading him have been changing how they practice slowly, imperfectly, in the way all real change happens. Koch is 23 years old right now, in Clausthal in the Harz Mountains, a young physician 3 years out of Göttingen, not yet famous, not yet the Koch whose name will be on the anthrax bacillus and the tuberculosis bacillus and the cholera vibrio. He is practicing general medicine in a small town and thinking about bacteria the way you've been thinking about the gap between the bottle on the shelf and what the bottle does to the body that takes it. What he will do in 15 years will make some of what you do in this shop obsolete. It will not make all of it obsolete, because the human bodies need to be treated as though its suffering matters will not become obsolete, and the apothecary's job will always be partly about that. But the specific arsenic tonics and the mercury ointments and the calomel packets and the Wunder balsam at the market stall, those will go, in time, driven out by the understanding of mechanism, by the standard of evidence that Dreyer described as epistemological, and that you think of more simply as the need to know why, not just that. You think about the boy from Sophienstrasse in his room tonight, sleeping probably, sleeping better than he has in weeks, because whatever the connection is between the strychnine tonic and the night twitching, the connection is broken now and his nervous system can do what it should do at night, which is recover. His colour will improve, with better food, with the iron preparation, with time. Not because of any dramatic intervention, but because the underlying problem was not the exotic one, not the weakness of vital forces requiring pharmaceutical stimulation. It was the ordinary one. Malnutrition in a city where meat is expensive and bread is the basis of most meals, and the children of working-class families absorb first the cost of every economic difficulty. "Eggs," you said to him. His patient gaze. "We don't have eggs." "You'll find something. You'll compound the iron preparation yourself tomorrow morning correctly, at the right dosage, and it will cost what it costs, and his mother will pay it, because that's what she does for her children. And on Thursday you'll mention to Frau Schönberg, who manages the household accounts and the neighbourhood charity distribution, that you know of a child on Sophienstrasse who could use eggs. Frau Schönberg will know what to do with this information. She always does. The sounds of the city, so familiar now that they are part of the texture of sleep, the way your own heartbeat is part of the texture of sleep. You hear them without hearing them. The cart in the distance, the water moving somewhere beneath the building, in the pipes of the building across the street that does have running water, the pressure of it, audible as a faint complaint in the walls on quiet nights. The breathing of the building itself, the old stone and old wood doing whatever old stone and old wood do through the night hours. You came to Berlin 3 years ago knowing almost nothing. You knew chemistry from books and some practical technique from your mother's kitchen, and an absolute certainty, the way you sometimes know things before you can explain why you know them, that the body's workings were worth understanding. You know more now. You know the mortar by weight and the balance by feel. You know which symptoms might mean tuberculosis, and which might mean simple fatigue, and which might mean nothing at all, the body doing its ordinary maintenance at a volume slightly above comfortable. You know the difference between the smell of a cholera preparation and the smell of a dysentery preparation, which are related but not identical. You know Virchow's papers well enough to quote passages from them in order, which is not useful knowledge in most social situations but has its value. And you know this: the dangerous remedies were trusted because the alternative was despair. Because a mother watching her child's colour wrong and his eyes unfocused needed to believe in something, and the physician with his credentials and his Latin case and his confident professional manner offered something to believe in, and she believed, and the belief was not stupid. The belief was human. The belief was what humans do when they are up against the wall of their own powerlessness, and the wall doesn't move and they can't stop believing, or they will stop functioning. The question that the next 100 years of medicine will spend answering is not, why did people trust dangerous remedies? That answer is clear and always has been. The question is, how do you build something worthy of that trust? How do you construct a medicine that deserves the belief that people will give it regardless, that earns what is freely offered? Virchow is trying. Colt will try. The physicians at the Charité who practice the physical examination with systematic hands and notebook writing students are trying, and somewhere on Linienstrasse in a 9-metre-long shop with amber bottles and a worn wooden counter and a mortar that's been in use since before you were born, an apothecary who revises his preparations when the evidence changes, who writes letters to physicians who harm their patients, who compels his apprentice to write everything in the register, is trying in his careful, incremental way. It's not enough. It never is, in the moment. But the direction is right, and direction matters when you're in the dark, and the dark is where you start. Let the sounds go. The cart, the water in the pipes, the building breathing, the distant fiddle from the tavern that has finally finished whatever tune it was playing, all of it farther now and quieter. Your hands on the blanket, the specific weight of tiredness in your legs from a day of walking that you've been tracking without fully acknowledging, the route from Schönbergs to Weinmeisterstrasse to Gormannstrasse, the long arc south to Heiliger Geiststrasse, the way back that took you past the Alexanderplatz and the Charité. Your feet have covered perhaps 12 kilometres today. Your hands have ground gentian root and chamomile flowers, and the mercury compound in its careful preparation, and a dozen smaller quantities of things. Your mind has done what minds do in work in apothecaries, received and sorted and held and cross-referenced continuously. You are tired in all the ways a person can be tired. Warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. This is more than Ernst from Sophienstrasse was before this morning. More than the man sitting against the wall near the tannery. More than the woman at the pump who comes every night with her 2 jugs, whose name you don't know, whose life you can only sketch. You have a bed and a blanket and work that means something, and someone teaching you to do it better. That's enough. That's what enough means when you're 19 and the year is 1866 and the city outside is doing what it does and the morning will come exactly as it always does. Settle. The weight of the straw mattress against your back, the familiar slight hollows and ridges of 3 years sleeping, the absolute darkness of the room that your eyes have stopped, trying to navigate, the cough from the 4th floor, quieter now, or you're already further from it. Somewhere in this city tonight there is a child whose colour is coming back, whose body is making the adjustments that bodies make when you remove what was harming them and give them what they need. The process is slow and cellular and entirely invisible from the outside, but it is happening. Somewhere, Virchow is writing. He writes at night sometimes. The papers have said this. The man works at hours that suggest he does not experience the night the way most people do, but as an extension of the day's thinking, which was interrupted by the teaching and the clinical work and the politics of the city council, but which can continue now in the quiet. Somewhere Coke is in his small-town office with his microscope, which he has because he is the kind of person who acquires microscopes, and he is looking at something through the lens and thinking about what it means. And somewhere on Linienstrasse in Berlin in 1866, an apothecary's apprentice is falling asleep with the smell of camphor and alcohol faint in the air of the back room, and tomorrow at 6 the counter will be open, and the city will come in with its ailments, and its belief, and its desperation, and its hope, and the work will continue. The amber bottles in the dark, the labelled drawers with their Latin names, the mortar and the pestle on the bench, the balance scale perfectly level. All of it waiting, all of it patient, all of it in its way trying. Let sleep come now, let the weight of the city lift, let the names of the compounds fade, the German and the Latin both, let them become sounds without meaning, warm and low. The register is written, the preparations are made, the revision is begun. Tomorrow Ernst's colour will be better, Frau Schönberg will know what to do. And somewhere, slowly, the medicine is changing. Let that be enough. Let it be enough. Good night.